I want you to picture the most humiliating moment of your life, the kind that burns in your chest like swallowed coal, and then imagine that moment is being broadcast to your entire neighborhood under the flashing red and blue strobe lights of two police cruisers. That was my Tuesday night, standing in the driveway of the home I've owned for 15 years, watching my new wife being treated like a criminal because one woman, a woman with too much time and a heart full of battery acid, decided we didn't belong. Let's rewind, because to understand why Patty Gable declared war on my family, you have to understand who I was before the war started. My name is Marcus Thorne, and for a long time, I was just the quiet guy at the end of the cul-de-sac in Oak Haven Estates, a man trying to rebuild a life that had shattered into a million jagged pieces when my first wife, Julia, died of leukemia 7 years ago. I'm a carpenter by trade, a guy who speaks better with a lathe and a chisel than with words. And for years, the only sound in my house was the hum of my table saw in the garage and the silence of a man who thought his capacity for joy had been buried 6 feet under. But life, in its infinite and strange mercy, had other plans. I met Elena Vance at a coffee shop downtown, not knowing that she was about to turn my monochromatic world into Technicolor. Elena was everything I wasn't. She was sharp, articulate, fiery, and possessed a laugh that could crack the drywall of my cynicism. We married in a small, private ceremony, just us and my college-aged son, Leo, because neither of us wanted a spectacle, we just wanted each other. Now, here is the detail that matters, the detail that would eventually become the pivot point of this entire nightmare. Elena was a high-powered legal professional, recently appointed to a massive position in the city, but she wanted our home to be a sanctuary, a place where she didn't have to wear the heavy mantle of her job, so she kept her title quiet. And that silence was the opening Patty Gable needed. Patty was the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a 5-star general's rank, ruling over our suburban sprawl with a terrifying mixture of boredom and malice. She was a woman who measured the length of your grass with a ruler and the worth of your soul by the make of your car. When Elena started moving her boxes into my place, arriving late at night after long days at the courthouse, Patty didn't see a hard-working woman starting a new life. She saw a threat, an anomaly, a stain on her perfect beige canvas. It started on a Tuesday. Elena had just pulled in, exhausted, dragging her garment bags and a stack of heavy reference books from her trunk when the night exploded. I was in the kitchen when I saw the lights, those aggressive, strobing police lights that bounce off the neighbors' windows, and my stomach dropped. By the time I opened the front door, 2 officers from the Tucson PD were already walking up the path, hands hovering near their belts, looking tense. "Sir, step aside," one of them said, his voice flat, while the other moved toward Elena, who was standing frozen by her car, looking more confused than scared. Across the street, standing in the shadows of her manicured hedges like a phantom, was Patty Gable, arms crossed, a smug, tight-lipped smile plastered on her face as she watched the show she had directed. The officer explained, with embarrassing volume, that they had received a call about illicit commercial activity and a suspicious woman soliciting at this address. My blood ran cold, then hot, boiling with a rage I hadn't felt in years, because Patty hadn't just called in a noise complaint. She had weaponized the police, accusing my wife, a woman of immense dignity, of being a prostitute in her own driveway. Elena, to her credit, remained ice-cold calm, handing over her ID with steady hands, but I could see the humiliation in her eyes as neighbors peeked through their blinds, drinking in the drama. The police left eventually, apologizing profusely once they ran Elena's ID and realized she was a squeaky clean citizen, but the damage was done. We lay in bed that night, the silence heavy between us, and I just knew, that this wasn't over. Patty had fired the first shot, and when she didn't get the arrest she wanted, she decided to hit us where she knew it would hurt a working man like me. The wallet. 3 days later, I found the envelope taped to my windshield, neon orange and offensive. It was a violation notice from the Oak Haven Estates HOA, citing my Chevy Silverado work truck as a commercial vehicle unauthorized for overnight parking, accompanied by a fine of $1,200. Now, I have parked that truck in that driveway for a decade. It's my livelihood. It's how I feed my family, and never once had it been an issue. But suddenly, under Patty's regime, my means of survival was a blight on the neighborhood. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the fine, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my neck. $1,200 wasn't just money. It was the principle. It was a bully taking lunch money because she could. Elena walked in, pouring coffee, and she picked up the notice, reading it with that terrifyingly neutral expression she gets when she's processing information. She could have ended it right there. She could have made one phone call, flashed her credentials, and nuked Patty from orbit, but Elena operates on a different frequency of integrity. She's baiting you, Marcus, Elena said softly, putting the paper down. She wants a reaction. She wants you to scream so she can call the cops again. She's going to get a reaction, I muttered, grabbing my keys, my mind already racing, not toward violence, but toward research. I'm going to the library. I spent the next 6 hours in the basement of the public library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust, reading the Oakhaven bylaws until my eyes burned. I dissected every clause, every subsection, every architectural guideline, looking for the weapon I needed to fight back. And there, buried in the fine print of Article 4, Section C regarding board member conduct and property standards, I found the loose thread that would unravel Patty's entire sweater. Because the thing about tyrants like Patty is that they are almost always hypocrites. They believe the rules are walls to pin others in, not floors they have to stand on themselves. I discovered that while Patty was fining me for a work truck, the bylaws clearly stated that commercial vehicles were defined by weight class and signage, neither of which applied to my truck if parked on a private driveway. But the real gold, the absolute diamond in the rough, was what I found when I cross-referenced her address with the county clerk's permit office. Patty, the woman who patrolled our streets measuring grass height with a ruler, had built an unpermitted, code-violating extension on the back of her house 3 years ago, an extension she was currently listing on a vacation rental site under a pseudonym. She wasn't just breaking the rules. She was running an illegal hotel in the middle of the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. I sat back in that creaky library chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. Patty Gable thought she was hunting a rabbit, but she had just stepped into a cage with a wolf who knew how to use a hammer. I took out my phone and started taking screenshots, documenting everything, because I knew the next board meeting was in 2 days, and I wasn't going just to defend myself. I was going to war. The community center smelled like stale coffee and floor wax, the scent of suburban bureaucracy. I walked into the monthly meeting of the Oakhaven Estates board with a manila folder tucked under my arm, feeling the adrenaline humming in my veins like a live wire. Patty Gable sat at the head of the plastic folding table, flanked by her sycophants, looking like a queen presiding over a court of peasants. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed, a predator spotting prey that refused to die. "Mr. Thorne," she announced, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that makes your teeth ache. "We're not discussing appeals tonight. Pay the fine or move the truck." I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the room, feeling the eyes of 20 tired neighbors on me. "I'm not here to appeal, Patty," I said, keeping my voice steady, projecting the calm of a man holding 4 aces. "I'm here to discuss Article 4, Section C." I opened the folder. "You fine me for a commercial vehicle. My truck is personal use. However," I slapped a photo onto the table, "this is your driveway, Patty. That's a Cadillac Escalade and a Lexus parked across the sidewalk, blocking ADA access, every single night for the last month. That's a $50 fine per day, per vehicle." The room went deadly silent. Patty's face twitched, a crack in the porcelain mask. "That's ridiculous. Those are guests." "And this," I interrupted, slamming down the printouts from the vacation rental site, "is the listing for the garden suite attached to your home. No permits on file with the county. No variance from the HOA. You're running an illegal business, Patty, while fining me for going to work." The murmurs started then, rippling through the room like a growing storm. The Hendersons, a nice couple who lived 2 doors down, looked at the photos and then at Patty with open hostility. Patty stood up, her face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. She slammed her hand on the table. "This is slander. This is a personal attack because you can't follow simple rules. You and that woman you have living there." She pointed a manicured finger at me, her voice rising to a shriek. "I know what goes on in that house. Strange cars at all hours. Men coming and going. We all know what she is. The air left the room. She had done it again. She had doubled down on the slur, right there in public. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't just mean, she was delusional. She was so convinced of her own righteousness that she couldn't see the cliff she was sprinting toward. "Be very careful, Patty," I said, my voice low. "You have no idea who you're talking about." She sneered. "I'm talking about a woman who clearly has no respect for this community." I walked out of that meeting feeling like a gladiator who had drawn first blood, but I underestimated her desperation. A cornered animal bites, and Patty was about to bite hard. 3 nights later, at 2 a.m., our house was raided again. This time, it wasn't a noise complaint. It was a swatting. Patty had called 911, claiming she heard screaming, gunshots, and a woman begging for her life. I woke up to the sound of my front door being kicked in, breathless, confused, thrown onto the floorboards with a knee in my back, handcuffed in my own living room, while Leo watched from the stairs, terrified. It took an hour to clear it up. An hour of Elena standing in her silk pajamas, calmly explaining to the sergeant that there were no guns, no violence, just a vindictive neighbor. When the police finally left, apologizing but clearly annoyed at the waste of resources, I sat on the edge of the couch, my wrists bruised, my head in my hands. I was done. I was ready to sell the house, ready to run, ready to let the bully win just to make it stop. That's when Elena sat next to me. She didn't hug me. She took my face in her hands and forced me to look at her. Her eyes were hard, darker than I'd ever seen them, burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. "Marcus," she said, "I need to tell you something I haven't been able to say because of the ethics clause in my contract." "What?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I didn't want my job to overshadow our life," she whispered. "But you need to know who I am. I'm not just a lawyer, honey. I'm the newly appointed magistrate judge for District 9. I stared at her. The words floated in the air. District 9. That was our district. That covered civil disputes. That covered harassment. That covered restraining orders. She has no idea," I stammered. "No," Elena said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "She thinks I'm a nobody. She thinks she can bully us out." Elena stood up, smoothing her pajamas like they were judicial robes. "She's going to file for a restraining order, Marcus. She's going to try to legally force us away because she feels threatened by your little presentation at the meeting. And when she files that paperwork, it goes to your court." I finished, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "It goes to the municipal docket," she corrected. "And since she doesn't know my married name yet, and she doesn't know my face because I'm new, she's going to walk into a trap she built herself." The next week was a blur of silent preparation. We installed high-definition cameras everywhere. We documented every time Patty walked by our house, screaming profanities. We recorded her watering her lawn at 3 a.m. to create noise she could report. We built a mountain of evidence, not for the HOA board, but for a court of law. And then it happened. A process server knocked on our door. Patty had filed for an emergency order of protection against both of us, claiming we were stalking her, harassing her, and running a criminal enterprise. She had checked the box demanding a hearing. She wanted her day in court. I looked at the court date on the summons. December 12th, courtroom 4B. I looked at Elena. She was drinking tea, reading the summons over my shoulder. "Courtroom 4B, she mused. "That's my room." Patty Gable had just invited the devil to dance, and she didn't even know she was providing the music. The morning of the hearing, the sky over the city was a piercing, unforgiving blue. I sat in the gallery of courtroom 4B, my hands resting on a stack of binders that contained every lie Patty Gable had ever told. The room was surprisingly full. Patty had brought an entourage, 3 members of the HOA board, and I had brought mine. The Hendersons, Mrs. Higgins, and my lawyer, Samantha Cole. Patty walked in like she was attending a coronation. She was wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than my first car, her hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde defiance. She didn't even look at me. She marched to the plaintiff's table, spread out her papers, and chatted with her friends, laughing. She looked confident. She looked victorious. She looked like a woman who believed the world existed solely to serve her whims. The bailiff, a stern man named Rodriguez who looked like he wrestled bears on the weekend, stepped forward. "All rise," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Elena Vance presiding." Patty stood up, smoothing her skirt, looking towards the judge's door with a practiced, respectful smile. The door opened, and out walked my wife. She wasn't wearing the silk pajamas or the jeans she wore in the garden. She was draped in heavy black robes, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a mask of absolute, terrifying neutrality. She climbed the steps to the bench, the wood creaking in the silence, and sat down. I watched Patty. I watched the exact moment her soul left her body. Her smile faltered, then froze, then crumbled into a rictus of confusion. She squinted. She leaned forward. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again like a fish on a dock. She looked at me, then back at the judge, and I saw the blood drain from her face until she looked like a ghost. "Be seated," Elena said. Her voice wasn't the voice I heard over coffee. It was the voice of the state. It was deep, resonant, and devoid of mercy. Patty didn't sit. She gripped the table. Your Honor," she squeaked. There's been a mistake. That's the woman. That's the defendant." Elena looked over her reading glasses, staring directly into Patty's eyes. "Ms. Gable, I am the presiding magistrate of this court. You have filed a petition for an order of protection against a Marcus Thorne and an Elena Vance. Is that correct?" I didn't know," Patty stammered, looking around the room for an exit that didn't exist. "I didn't know it was you." "Ignorance of a judicial officer's identity does not excuse perjury, Ms. Gable," Elena said, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You have sworn under oath that the residents of the defendant's address are engaged in criminal activity and harassment. Since you have insisted on this hearing, we will proceed. Present your evidence." What followed wasn't a trial, it was an autopsy. Patty, shaking so hard her bracelets rattled, tried to present her blurry photos of my truck. Samantha, my lawyer, countered with 4K video footage of Patty trespassing on my property to peek in windows. Patty claimed we were loud. We played the audio of her screaming at Mrs. Higgins for walking her poodle too slowly. But the final nail, the moment that made the stenographer stop typing and stare, was when Elena addressed the accusations of prostitution. "You have repeatedly utilized police resources," Elena said, flipping through the police reports I had subpoenaed, "to accuse a sitting judge of solicitation. You have filed false instruments with this court. You have weaponized the HOA to target neighbors based on personal vendetta." Elena took off her glasses. "Ms. Gable, this court finds your petition not only without merit but malicious in nature. The petition is dismissed with prejudice." She picked up her gavel, but she didn't bang it yet. "Furthermore, due to the evidence presented of your own code violations and admission of filing false police reports, I am referring this transcript to the district attorney's office for potential charges regarding filing false instruments and harassment of a public official." Bang! The sound was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of an empire collapsing. Patty left the courtroom in tears, abandoning her Chanel bag on the table for a solid 10 seconds before running back to get it. Her entourage pretended they didn't know her. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was nuclear. Patty resigned from the HOA board via a cowardly email 2 days later. The city inspectors, alerted by the court records, descended on her house and fined her $15,000 for the illegal rental unit, forcing her to tear down the extension. She was slapped with a restraining order preventing her from contacting any board member or resident of Oak Haven, and she eventually sold her house at a loss just to escape the shame. I was elected HOA president the following month. The first thing I did was abolish the guest parking fines and dismantle the surveillance committee Patty had built. We got our peace back. The nights are quiet now. I sit on the porch with Elena, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and we don't worry about blue lights or violation notices. We just worry about what to grill for dinner. But it leaves you with a question, doesn't it? We won because my wife happened to be a judge. We had a nuclear weapon in our back pocket that nobody knew about. But what if she wasn't? What if we were just regular people without the resources or the knowledge to fight back? Patty Gable destroyed 3 other families before she got to us. People who just moved away because they couldn't take the abuse. It feels good to see the bad guy lose, to see the bully humiliated in high definition. But true justice shouldn't rely on a cinematic twist or a secret identity. It should be the default, not the exception. We got lucky. But how many people out there are still waiting for their gavel to drop? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. Patty Gable learned the hard way that you never, ever judge a book by its cover. especially when that book is the penal code and it's about to be thrown at your head.